I'm Mark Bentham.
And I'm Graham Nichols.
And I'm Katie Holloway, and you are listening to Ordinary. Hello.
Hello.
How are you both?
I am good.
I'm okay.
I'm not morally good, but I'm good in the sense I have nothing particularly to complain about.
Oh, yeah. You're like morally a bit good, I guess.
It depends whether sort of theologically in the sight of God I'm morally righteous, but when someone says good, my grandchildren say good a lot. So how are you? They say good. And you kind of think, no, you're not good. That's part of the problem.
You're naughty.
But yeah.
My son introduced me to somebody as so-and-so, as naughty so-and-so. And I was like, do you have to, like, is that this person's identifier? It was somebody in his class who was known as naughty. I can't remember the first name of the boy even, but
probably good not to mention it, just in case they listen and they're connected to the naughty.
I think I on purpose tried to put his name out of my mind so that I wouldn't taint him with this, descriptor.
This naughtiness.
Yeah. Here we are. Any news, anyone? Anything exciting going on?
I've got the funny story that Mark knows already, which is a bit boring, really. But I was recently visiting my son Benjamin, who lives about 4 or 5 hours away, and I packed the car up, and that involved putting various bags and things and wet weather gear because it was raining a lot, and dog food and a couple of dog toys and a couple of little baskets to put the dogs in the car. And I set off, travelled for 4 hours, opened the boot to take them for a walk about 5 minutes from where my son lives. And there was only one dog in there, and I have 2 dogs.
Oh, no.
And so I discovered that I'd left one of my dogs behind sitting on the sofa, basically. Which was fine for him. I mean, it was no trauma for him, but it was a little bit traumatic for me because I kind of went through all this. Where have I left him? Did he get out at one of the service stations? Did he just jump out on the road? And he's now on the M4 or M5 or somewhere, just kind of bothering the traffic. So, thankfully I have relatives locally who are able to...
What did you do? Because you can't, ring the dog and tell him, just stay there. I'll be back in a couple of days.
It's all right. We love you.
I do have a camera, but not in that room. I have a camera in the conservatory where they are, so I couldn't even speak to him. He was fine. It was 4 hours of dossing around. As Mark said yesterday when we were joking about watching the television, smoking cigars.
Having the time of his life.
Yeah. Had himself to the fridge. Not a problem. All good.
Yeah. Thankfully, he's not an eater. Otherwise, I had one dog you can never leave food out, but he's absolutely fine with food. But yeah, anyway, one of my kind relatives looked after him for the week while I was away.
Oh, nice. Oh, I really want to get a dog. So, if you need someone to look after a dog for a week, I'm the one. I'm not the one because
Stuart doesn't want a dog.
Stuart does not want a dog, but I reckon I could win him over.
He's going to allow you to have a conversation anyway about it.
Yeah, we
said last time.
Just show him pictures of puppies.
I don't think that would do it. We've got some stick insect eggs, which may or may not turn into stick insects.
To me, I'd rather have a dog every day.
In case you are not watching the video, Mark's face looks like a picture of disgust.
It's just the thought of stick insects in your house. Ugh.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a stick in your house.
Yeah. A relative of mine had a praying mantis, didn't like that.
Oh, getting any of those.
Well, because they eat crickets and various other. They do that as well, but they eat horrible insects. They just absorb them. It's all very horrible. But in accordance with our producer's instructions, we should get to the topic now.
Yeah, well, it's less than 5 minutes. I was trying to segue from. I was wondering if I could get from
stick insects to
stick
parents?
Insects or praying manti, who presumably not very good parents, to parents who may or may not be good, and what we should do to them.
Your eggs are the children, so there you are.
Yeah.
Your stick insect eggs.
I don't often think of my children as eggs, but
there we go.
No, but they're the children of the stick insects, so you're into parents and children.
We're there in yes. There we go. So we are on what are we? Halfway through on the 5th commandment, which is, I'm going to read it from the Bible so I get it correct. It says, honour your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. That is the 5th commandment. And I believe this episode will air the week prior to Mother's Day. So I feel like that's
Ooh, honour your
timing.
mums.
Unless you're listening to this any other time, in which case you still got to honour your mother and father. They're living, even if it's not Mother's Day. So, this is famously the first covenant with a promise attached. Let's talk about that first, because it does kind of stick out. None of the others do yet. None of the other ones do at all, do they? So why does this have that promise attached, and what significance are we to make of that? Who wants to kick this off? Mark does. That sounded like a volunteer.
I think it's, it is interesting, isn't it, that there is a promise attached. I mean, obviously, it's debated about why, but I think there is a sense of one is training the expectation of authority, the importance of authority. You learn that in the home. If you don't learn it in the home, how are you ever going to respect the authority that the Lord has? So parents are inserted in that responsibility under the God to train and instruct. So I think there's the link there. I think therefore the promise there just shows, isn't it, the right relationship to authority, ultimately to the Lord, brings blessing. And I think you see that in the wider context of Deuteronomy, the kind of the blessings and the curse, that honouring the Lord, doing what is right, brings blessing. And that's then worked out in that kind of initial family context where you initially learn authority and what it is to respect authority. Yeah. There we go. That's my answer. I don't know what Graham wants to say.
I think all of that. I think you've got to link it to back and forth. So you've got to link it back to the first commandment because it's about honouring God, but link it forward in the sense that all the other commandments, all the other commandments really are social. They're more horizontal. So it's the kind of introducer to the commandments that talk about our relationships with other people. So it's the kind of header of those. The second table of the law, as it's called. So I think it kind of, in a way, it covers all of them. But I think it is fundamental and foundational, which is why I think it gets it. About authority and so on. And I think there's a pragmatic reason sometimes people use, which I think is fair enough, which is to say when authority is honoured, and when God is honoured, and when parents are honoured, society is better, and so you live longer in that sense of know God's blessing in the land. It's a kind of it's a fundamental building block. And actually, if you're honouring your parents, and like in Deuteronomy 6, where it talks about honouring God, it's the Shema, the love the Lord your God with all your heart, and then it goes on to talk about teaching your children. So your children are supposed to be teaching you about God. So if you're honouring them, they're teaching you about God, and society works better. So I think,
you mean your parents teaching you about God?
What did I just say? Sorry.
You said your children.
Yeah. Children sometimes do too.
To be fair, they do as well.
I did mean parents.
Yes,
your parents teach you about God, and so everything is working well. If your parents are honouring God, teaching you about God, you're honouring your parents who are teaching you about God. Society will flourish.
Yeah. So is that more like natural consequences that we talk about?
I was adding
sometimes?
that one on the end. I still think all the other things Mark said and the fact that it's a kind of overall heading for what God loves to see is honour for him and the structures he's put in place, which foundationally include parents.
Yeah. And just to add into that, I think it's not that we're just honouring God as God, but actually at the beginning, as he then explains it in Deuteronomy, you begin to see him refer to himself as Father. As father to Israel. So the reality isn't just, hey, I'm respecting the parents are are under the fatherhood of God, who is our ultimate father. And so as I honour my parents, I'm honouring my heavenly Father, or in the context of Israel, and there is blessing and there is goodness and rightness in that, which is then connected, as we said, to the Deuteronomic blessings and curses.
Yeah, great. So how the original hearers, then the Israelites, what would this have looked like for them to obey this before we start looking into applying this ourselves? What did honouring your father and mother look like in that context, do you think?
I think it would have included obedience, but I think it would have included respect and accepting their authority, which is a bit broader than just obeying. It would have been an honour that was in the heart. But I do think, I know we keep saying this, but I do think it included, and maybe primarily included, honouring them as they teach you about God.
Yeah. Okay.
And listen to what they've got to say. We'll talk about it when it comes to the New Testament, but when parents didn't honour I'm really muddled now. When children didn't honour their parents in the Old Testament, things went wrong. Famously with Eli's children.
Yeah, I was just thinking of him.
Or with, in a sense, Samuel and Rehoboam and so on. I am nowhere with names or anything else. Solomon and Rehoboam. And he didn't really honour his father and the wisdom of his father and his father's wishes. So lots of things broke down where children didn't honour their parents in general and honour them when it came to honouring the Lord. I think that's what it meant. I don't know if I covered all the bases there, Mark.
Well, and what you said, the question, Kenny, was how would it look like back then? The reality is it doesn't look much different to what it looks like in that sense now. Yeah. In the context of that.
I suppose the main difference is that they were probably much closer. They probably had more generations living more closely together. Especially here when they're literally walking in the wilderness together, and so that potentially has more. Maybe it's easier or maybe clearer how to obey this commandment in that kind of setting as opposed to today, where once you're an adult, you're potentially much further away. I don't know. We can talk about that in a minute.
I think just sticking with the Old Testament, a lot of Proverbs, particularly the early part of Proverbs, are instructions to sons in particular, but I think we can apply it to children in general and to parents, and about how sons bring honour or dishonour on their parents, and that there's little kind of parallel statements in Proverbs about why son brings joy to the father and anguish to the mother and so on. And there's lots and lots of those, not just one. So it's obviously a thing that's a really significant thing. Both the duty to pass on the teaching of God, but also the duty of children to honour their parents as they pass on that teaching. The wisdom for the whole of life, which they're seeking to pass on.
Yeah. Great. Shall we move on to today? Yeah.
Yes, we don't have to keep We don't have to keep it anymore because it's the old covenant. So we ignore it now in the new covenant because we just go on our own conscience really and do what we fancy.
Is that the line you're going with?
No, I think that would be heretical and wrong. As I think I do for most of the commandments, but if not all of them.
Please be all of them.
Well, we had a discussion last week about the fourth commandment and the best way to apply. I'm a bit more of a semi-literalist with the fourth. But anyway, coming back to this one, I think it does mean pretty much what it meant then, obviously worked out in our own societal context. And I think it presents particular challenges, especially to older parents and how we care for elderly parents and stuff, which perhaps where people weren't living so long, it wasn't quite such a thing.
Yeah. Maybe let's look at the different kind of seasons of being a child and a parent and
I think
them apart.
It's worth just saying though that it still goes through Christ, and Christ is highlighted as one who obeyed his father perfectly and honoured his father. So John, particularly in his gospel, makes much of this. Jesus says, John 5, I only do what I see my father do, and I only do what he tells me to do.
Yeah.
So that's important because that means that when I fail to honour my parents and disobedience, actually I'm covered because Christ has done it perfectly. Yeah. So it is fulfilled, even as that then command is taken forward, as Paul picks it up in Ephesians 6, quoting directly and applying this. There is that sense of, I am still, when I get this wrong, it's still applied to me because of Christ, who perfect and is our model in that sense.
Yeah. He fulfilled the law for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we still want to keep it as well.
Yeah, out of obedience,
kind of
out of love,
there.
Rather than out of any sense of one must keep it in order to be saved. But as the law, as I'm saved, it comes to me as a sense of then changed lifestyle that reflects and honours that which the Lord has required and commanded.
Yeah. It's that Romans 8 thing, isn't it? Like that it's that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully fulfilled in us as we live in the spirit and not in the flesh. So it's that we are in the spirit, so we do want to obey, but we're not in the flesh, so we don't have to obey.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we've got new life and we've got new allegiance and new master. So we serve in freedom, as at some point I will be preaching about.
Great. At some point on this podcast, or just
at some point
later today?
Depends when the podcast goes out. But
I see.
We are preaching through Romans in our church. At the moment.
Are you? Oh, fun.
So we're crossing through some of those texts, all about why we still want to obey the law, obey Christ, obey the commandments, honour God, and honour our parents as we do that.
Yeah, great. Looking at seeking to apply this, then how? If you are a child under 18 living in your parents' house still, what might obeying this look like? So what does honouring your mother and father look like in that context? Maybe this is the most straightforward, but maybe not.
Well, it's going to change slightly as the child gets older.
Yeah.
So the honour is the sense of respecting the obedience that you expect obedience as they live under. But how that then is worked out will be, as they get older, there will be different kind of boundaries, limits set, etc. But I think there's the sense of a kind of an honouring and a respecting of one as parents within the household, and that's then often seen in obedience. That's going to be worked out slightly different for a younger child to an older child, and where those lines are and what that looks like and how one navigates that. But the reality is you're still looking for that sense of honouring and respecting. Now, the difficulty is that we sometimes then in the back of our minds immediately think Victorian, which means kind of children shouldn't speak. They're kind of like well-trained dogs. They're kind of on command, never, that kind of idea. And I don't think it is. I think, you can have fun with your children. There could be banter, there could be laughter. They're going to get it wrong. But ultimately, is there that fundamental respecting of your authority, your wishes, your desires? And of course, they will break it. But there will be times when, you're then having conversations, particularly as they get older, about where those boundaries are drawn and what that looks like. And when they're younger, you're not going to have that kind of conversation. As they get older, you're going to have much more of that conversation. So it honours in a different way. They honour you by having the conversation and talking to you about it, rather than just not doing it, etc.
Yeah. So what are some good ways of teaching this commandment to our children? Because I feel like there are loads of pitfalls, especially, my kids are very much the age where they have to do what I say because they're primary school age. They're very young. How do I teach it to them without saying, you have to do what I say, you have to obey me, you have to honour me because God says so, and that's kind of the line. And that, that does sound quite dogmatic and like, I'm better than you because God says so. And it's not that. Well, it's definitely not that I'm better than them. But, how do we, I don't know, and what are the pitfalls in trying to teach our children to obey this commandment by honouring us?
I think it's always a danger when you just use the Bible to beat your children over the head, metaphorically.
It's quite a thick book. So.
Yes, indeed. And sometimes with children who are believers, it's of course you want to teach them what the Bible says, but not every kind of misbehaviour say, well, you're a Christian, so you should do this, because then it becomes kind of legalism. But I think it's completely legitimate to say, God has put me in this role as your parents, or as your parent, but together as your parents, and so God wants you to obey and honour me. I think that's all right to say that. Not very often, because most of the time it just happens naturally. So I'm not sure I ever had a conversation with my children to say, you should honour me because that's what God wants. I think you just kind of assume it and you teach it, but not necessarily in the moment. They're disobeying and you say, okay, let's go and look at Exodus 20, you're not obeying. Yeah. It's kind of assumed. I think they know it. So that moment is just a moment to continue, whether it's reasoning or whether it's discipline or whether it's giving way or whatever it is, you just continue with that rather than suddenly thrust the command. I think you teach the command more generally and help them to learn it. So yeah, I think it is a natural thing that should happen, and I think there is a tendency, and this is what people of my generation do to people of younger generations, is for parents not to want to be parents. They want to be their children's friends, or it's actually not a nice thing to do to your children. It's actually abrogating your responsibility, because they need parents and they need security and they need a sense that there's boundaries. This protects them, and it actually makes them feel more secure, not less secure. If you just say, well, kind of, not literally, but do what you want, or to just spend your life trying to sort of negotiate with them, then it's wearying for you, but it's actually very destabilizing for them. And I think, I'm obviously a grandparent now as well, and sometimes when my grandchildren are rebellious, you just have to kind of say, not so much the command, but you just say, we're the parents. We're not actually the parents, but we're in the role of parents now, so we are making the decisions. I will discuss this with you and try and explain, but ultimately we're going to decide, what we're having for tea, where we're going, what film we're watching, when it's time to come in. We have that role, and feel the freedom of that, child. Feel like you don't have to make that decision. You can just worry about playing the game.
I'd quite like someone to tell me what I'm having for dinner every day, to be honest. Maybe that's a good distinction. The explain, not discuss. But then with some things, as they get older, obviously you can then have a discussion. What film do you want to watch? That can be a discussion, not rather than I'm explaining why I've chosen this film.
Yeah, and I think I know Mark wants to say something, but when he's got older children, so he's going through this process. It's not so much they need to stop obeying you; it's that you, as a parent, stop asking them to obey lots of things as they get older. So it's a lot of it is conditioned by the parents rather than the child deciding when it's time to rebel. But I think you, as a sensitive parent, realise there are now a number of things where I can't just say eat your peas. There is a degree of agency that I'm allowing them to, because I want them to develop into being an adult. So I might try and persuade them to eat their peas, but I might, in a different way than I would when they were 5. When they're 15, they have much more autonomy. So I keep saying you must obey me, but when it comes to it, they still need to obey you, but you don't do that so often. Sorry, Mark, you were going to say something just now.
No. Well, just on the back of that, I think it's Carson who said something like, when he was to parent his kids when they're teenagers, everything is up for grabs apart from honouring, respecting us. That kind of, or sass. It was that kind of. Any of the rules are up for grabs, in terms of we can discuss them, have it, but we won't put up with that kind of disrespect, rudeness, dishonouring kind of thing. And I think as you get to parents, as you get to teenagers, that is where you're kind of moving, because you want them to be young adults. So, but in the end, there may still be a sense where you're saying, well, we've heard the discussion, but actually this is the decision. You still got to come in at a certain time. Now they may want, 2:00 and you end up, with a 12:00, and you want to 10, there's going to be room, but there's still boundaries. There's still boundaries that you set.
I'm putting my children to bed at 7:00 until they're 18, and you will not persuade me otherwise. Yeah,
they might. But I think what I was going to say is that, in a sense, when you talked about how do we teach this, I think one of the ways to teach is exactly what Graham said, is that in one sense we just set the expectation, but on the flip side of that is that when they break it, and they disobey us, and they will, we apply the gospel. And it's at that point we're kind of, look, we all break it, we all get it wrong. Actually, this is the reason why Jesus died, because none of us perfectly obey or honour our parents as we should. So you're kind of reinforcing it through the positive of the gospel and explaining the sense of, actually, there's a goodness and there's a freedom that actually Jesus died so that we are forgiven, but there's a goodness in what Jesus has commanded. And I think sometimes we teach the laws as if they're bad for us, and actually they're good for us, is what Graham was saying. We want to keep saying, that, no, this is the best for you. Actually, I know what is best at this stage. That's okay.
They're more delicious than peas. They're like honey.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Let's talk about applying this in different seasons of life then. So what about and I think this, and probably lots of people found this really hard to just negotiate what it looks like when you're like a younger adult. You've left home, but maybe recently left home, maybe recently married, or recently got a flat with friends or whatever. You left home and you want to honour your parents, but you no longer live with them. You're over the age of 18. Like what does honouring your parents look like then when you're not under their rule, essentially?
Well,
no one wants to say.
Well, no, but I mean, I think it's there's a slight loss of variables on that.
Yeah.
As in, someone who's got married is set up they're essentially they're an independent family. So honouring will look like much more respecting parents. You may still ask them for advice. You might still seek to understand it, but they've lost their kind of any authority in that sense. A young person who's still at university and you're funding them, you have a slightly bit more kind of input in. Again, they're independent. They've got their own decisions to be made. You can't, but you're probably going to be speaking in different ways into that, and they're still asking for honouring, respecting. I think it's those kind of ways. I think one of the big ones which doesn't change is how we speak about our parents. So sometimes we can belittle in how we speak of them to others, or how we speak of them. So I think sometimes, especially when we're in that early 20s, we become quite confident, self-assured. We think we know it. We've got it all sorted. And therefore we speak to our parents as if they're kind of, down, belittled, have no idea, got no wisdom. And I think that's not honouring them. That's dishonouring them. It's not respecting them. You may have the freedom to disagree with them, but I think there's a way in which we can honour and respect what they're saying, suggesting, and we weigh, and we do that with care and love and thought, rather than kind of belittle, rudeness, and how we speak, and even just honouring them in terms of if we said we'll turn up, we turn up. If it's all those kind of ways, really. Not taking advantage of them, but are all those kind of ways, really.
Yeah. Have you got anything you want to add on that, Graham?
Honouring their wishes.
Who's done that?
Yeah, honouring their wishes, and parents making sure they don't put too many obligations on their children. Like, totally agree with Mark. Yeah. It's different when you're single to if you're married, but you may be long-term single, so that in a sense, you've set up your own home and you're independent.
Yeah.
Which is slightly different to when you're perhaps a student and you're not quite at the stage of being married, but are going to get married, sort of thing. Yeah, I think that's really difficult because. It's not difficult. Well, it is difficult. Yeah, it's difficult if a parent becomes demanding. When you're a married couple, you got children, you have parents who live a long way away. They have certain wishes that they want to see you, or that if you have children, and they want to see the children, and so it's not easy sometimes to navigate honouring their wishes, but proportioning them and saying, talking through carefully with them. No, we can't actually spend every holiday with you, or we can't spend every Christmas with you, and those sort of things, which can be difficult in families, and with all of our sort of sinful and selfish behaviour, and sometimes we can be selfish as the young married couple and not give our parents the honour of sort of still seeing us and sharing in our lives.
The honour of our presence.
Indeed, quite. And similarly, though, we can be terrible as parents of that married couple, putting unreasonable demands on them and wanting it to be like when they were at home.
I can see how hard that transition is now that my kids are still little, but I can see it, to have them suddenly not in my house. I would want to phone them and say, oh, where were you? What did you do last night? And all of this, I can see that it's going to be hard when you get to that stage. Yeah.
I mean, flip side, I think, young people can then just use their parents.
Yeah.
So, just use them to do their jobs, babysit their kids, look after their kids, and not invest in the relationship. So you're not kind of honouring them because well, I see them all the time, but actually you don't see them. You're kind of just using them. And of course, more often than not, parents are really happy for that because they're invested in grandparents and all the rest of it. But I think there's a tension there that sometimes cannot be helpful.
Does this commandment apply to in-laws as well? So as a married person, am I obliged to honour my mother and father-in-law?
I think you are in the sense of being one flesh. I think it's different. The relationship is not the same, so what it looks like is different. But mainly, you're enabling and respecting your spouse's desire to honour their parents in the way you honour them. So yeah. We're talking about it as though it's easy. I in my life have not found this always very easy, both with my own parents or my in-laws, or being a parent of adults and everything else. These are challenges. I would say.
I think even when you've got good parents, it's a challenge. Can we talk about bad parents? So some people have got objectively bad parents for whatever reason. How did they apply that? So maybe if they were, abandoned, or if there's some kind of abuse, any type, emotional, physical, anything, what is the obligation there for the Christian who wants to keep the commandments?
Yeah, and I think the obligation is to be safe, and so we would never encourage anyone to do something that puts them in a position of danger because they're sort of trying to, in a wrong way, religiously apply this commandment.
Yeah.
So not to obey anything from a parent who's characterized by abuse. But I think where that abuse is perhaps in the past and has been repented of, either very explicitly or by practice, is no longer the case. I think finding ways to honour, which is really, really hard, but finding ways to honour and respect and to still have some relationship with that parent, I think is what we're obliged to do, and that can be a distinctive thing about being a Christian, in that we don't bear a grudge, particularly if that parent tries to move towards us in some way. Yeah. That we're willing to forgive. I've seen examples of that where that has happened, and it's been a good thing.
It is worth noting the command doesn't say, even as it's reiterated, honour your mother and father who are good. It just says honour your father and mother.
Yeah.
So even if I have appalling parents who are abusive, there is still a sense that I am to honour them. Now, as Graham rightly says, you've got to keep safe. We're not talking about therefore going around the house, but I think you honour them in how you speak about them would be a way. So, the temptation, particularly if we've been harmed, particularly if we've been really treated abusively and appallingly, is to then kind of run them down, speak ill of them, put them down. And I think one of the ways we honour the parents, because they're still our biological parents, however bad or whatever, is not to run them down in that way. I think that's a form of honouring that is probably just all you can do on one level. You're not going to be in relationship with, probably be very hard. It may be that you're willing to forgive, and what that means if they are repentant. It's not just, I forgive you. I think, so there are those pragmatic ways. I think it's in a sense of even how I think about them is to think, they did this horrific thing, but I'm not going to run them down. I'm not going to speak ill unfavourably of them. I'm not going to make up. I'm not going to make out that they're brilliant parents in any way, shape or form. But I think and it's not that I'm saying I'm never going to speak about the fact that I was abused, but I think how we do that and speak about can be done in a way that reflects a sense of I'm still seeking to honour the fact that they gave birth to me in that sense.
Yeah, that's helpful, I think. What about where should we go?
Older parents.
Yeah, and then I wondered about talking about those who don't have parents as well. But let's talk about older parents first. So then you touched on it earlier about how we care for their parents and they're kind of their final season of life. Like, what does that look like then to honour them then?
Yeah, I think it's tricky in a society where everyone's busy and where there is provision. But I think the primary obligation to care for aging parents, aging people, is actually their families.
Yeah. And
the church can help where there are single people or people who haven't got children to care for them, and I think the church can step in and be an advocate for them. But I think we should be the primary advocate for our parents. That may mean they have to come and live with us. It may mean we have some hardship, either financial or time-wise, to care for them in old age. And yeah, this was challenging just thinking about it again in preparation for this. Kind of that stage, and whether I did it very well for my parents who are no longer here on this earth. So yeah, I think it's a big thing and a big part of keeping this commandment.
Yeah. Is there a sense that we should kind of prepare for that in advance, as someone who has lots of parents?
Yeah, my experience was that they moved very quickly from being independent to being dependent, and slightly caught me out. So you get kind of lazy in a sort of good relationship where your parents are independent. That sort of middle area where you're an independent family and they're an independent family, and you see each other and it's really good, and you share lots of fun and stuff together, and it sort of tapers off as they get older and they haven't got so much time or capacity, but it's all fine. And then suddenly they have needs, and you've spent your whole life not having to care for your parents' needs ever. Yeah. You might help them wire up a plug or something, or lift something that's too heavy, but generally speaking, you never care for them, and suddenly you're caring for them. In my experience, that happened very quickly in the last few months and years, where it shifted, and I don't think I was quite always ready for the shift. So yeah. What might have prepared you for it? Don't know.
No, I think that's fine.
Listening to this podcast would have prepared me better.
And it's going to be different at different stages and what they need and how it is. I'm at the season where we're looking at both ends. So there's a sense where we are having to begin to think about how we care for parents, particularly on my side of things. Roz's parents are probably getting to that stage, and it'd probably be that what Graham's just described would suddenly go quite quickly. Right now they're very independent and all the rest of it, but it's not hard to imagine. And still at the same time, we've still got teenage boys who are so we're kind of looking, caring on one level and caring on the other, and you're then thinking, okay, what's your priority? You've got your immediate family that you've got to invest in, see, do, obviously your own responsibility in your work, and now caring for parents. And my parents who live, they're not just down the road. So it's a significant, it is a pressure. I'm grateful that I have siblings particularly my sister who's local, who picks up a lot of the care. But it means in lots of ways that the way I feel I honour is trying to visit regularly, seeking and speak particularly regularly to my father. So my mum, as you probably know, is end of life, unable to speak, Alzheimer's. So but visiting her and caring for her, but regularly honouring. I feel for me right now is really just speaking regularly to my father, so that he has someone who he can speak with, making sure that I do that as faithfully as I can, visiting when I can, and then it will mean at some points, stepping in, having some conversations, helping think through care, what that will look like. But it also means supporting my sister, who is honouring. So she's not married, so therefore there's an element where I spend part of honouring my parents is actually caring for my sister, and speaking with her about what's going on, because there is no one else. So it's kind of just messy.
Yeah. And this is where the church can help people as well, isn't it? And step in if people are believers. Before we finish, can we just talk about what it might look like for those who have lost their parents or never knew their parents? Some people that happens much younger in life. Is there still a way for those who don't have parents that they should be applying this? Like, is this commandment something that kind of applies to, like, in a church context? I know we talk about having spiritual children, don't we? Sometimes, like, if you don't have, like, all Christians are called to be parents in some form, because we are called to care for people within the church.
I think, definitely. I think the older-younger thing is really significant in the New Testament, the honouring of the older and learning from, and the responsibility of the older to model and to teach. So I think if you don't have parents, it's not like you try and find substitute parents, but there are people who there's all people that you could honour, but there may be some people you can particularly benefit from, learning from if you haven't got parents of your own. And I've seen that again happen in churches where an individual or a couple kind of latch on a bit to an older couple, and they find them to be sort of spiritual parents, but also parents to them. That can be a wonderful thing in a church. I think it does fan out, as I think Mark said at the very beginning, to a respect for authority generally. So I think we honour our parents by honouring all authority figures. You know, what Paul will go on to teach about honouring those in authority and those bearing the sword and so on. That will all flow out of honouring our parents. So if we don't have parents, we still have lots of authority figures to honour.
Yeah.
And to show our love for God in that.
Yeah, good. Great. Okay, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you both. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. You've been listening to Ordinary, the podcast seeking to help ordinary Christians live for Christ in everyday life. If you found this helpful, please do share with a friend. Come and find us on social media. We'd love to have you join our conversations. You can find us on Twitter @OrdinaryCCHH, on Instagram @OfficialOrdinaryPodcast, and on YouTube @OrdPod, that's ORDPOD. Or you can email your comments or questions to ordinary@cchh.org.uk. We'll see you next time.